but particularly to speak on activities over the weekend. We welcome back to the show Congressman Scott DesJarlais, who joins us on the Matt Murphy hotline. Hello, Congressman. I hope you're doing well, sir.
I am. Good afternoon.
Well, a good afternoon to you. Boy, oh boy. I mean, the weekend, it's got a lot of conservatives, libertarians, and the like. Those of us who are concerned about overspending, those of us who are concerned more about our borders as opposed to the borders of other countries. Look, I think we can walk and chew bubble gum at the same time. I think we can share concern with what's going on overseas, but focus on what's happening here at home. Doesn't feel like that's what happened over the weekend, Scott. Give me your assessment.
Yeah, well, one, it didn't all have to happen this weekend. I don't know what the sense of urgency was, especially the fact that we've been fighting against the Senate supplemental package now for several months, where they wanted just to write basically a check for $95 billion to divide among securing three other countries' borders, but not our own. And that was kind of our beef with it. And we actually had tried to carve out Israel funding a month or two ago and did that as a standalone, but the Senate wouldn't accept that because they wanted this whole package. And, there is issues with arm depletion in Ukraine in terms of 155s and some anti-aircraft. But if you look at the history of that war, it's gone on 26 months over 2 years. And we've spent about a little over 40 billion in armaments already. There's another 60 billion, maybe 70 billion that we're spent on. We don't exactly know what, propping up their government probably. This bill had 61 billion. I would say the arms need was probably closer to 10 or 11 billion. So for sake of transparency to the American people, one, Biden needs to go on TV and tell everyone why this is important, why we're sending our treasure there, and have a strategy to win. This basically funds a stalemate for the next 8 months, and then they're going to be back asking for more. So the Ukraine funding was very contentious. The Israel funding was not that contentious till they added $9 billion on to support Hamas. They call it humanitarian aid for Gaza, but we know how that works when you send money into a kind of a rogue country. Most of it doesn't get to where it's supposed to go. And a good example is the $6 billion that Biden unfroze to Iran, who said they could only use it on humanitarian and hospitals and things like that. Well, all their proxies, their terror proxies throughout the region were promptly restocked. So there's so many things wrong with this. I'll stop so you can ask me more specific questions.
No. I know I'm enjoying listening to your assessment and analysis. Go one step further and talk to me about what Taiwan has to do with any of this. Why did that get added on?
Okay. Well, the thing with Taiwan is that we all know that President Xi wants to take Taiwan back, and he's got a strategy to do that. It may be 2-3 years off. Everyone's using the 2027 timeline. It used to be 2030. And everything with China seems to happen quicker than we expect. So basically, Taiwan is preparing for their version of a D-Day landing as China crosses the channel. And so the Indo-Pacific region, including Guam and Japan and many of our other allies over there, are very nervous because of potential Chinese aggression. So that was put in there. I've sat in, hours and hours and hours of classified briefings on really all three of these, whether it's Ukraine, Israel, the North Korea, the situation with China and Taiwan. And the best way to win that fight is for it never to happen. And so I do think helping Taiwan fortify is not a bad idea. Again, the timing just to lump that in, I don't know. And I don't even know if it's the right amount.
What is that portion? Do you know off the top of your head?
It was about $8 billion.
Okay.
And honestly, the extra 50 or 60 billion or 50 billion going to Ukraine right now to prop up their government or whatever that it is they're doing with all that money would be better spent in the Indo-Pacific region, preparing or trying to prevent China from ever engaging in the war, because that would be a very costly war for all of us. It literally could lead to World War III. China, Russia, North Korea, Iran are all kind of bundling together, forming a little axis. And so that one needs some attention, but it needs to be better understood. And it is a real threat that is coming.
So help me understand, or do you know what the total amount roughly has been? Let's include this, I guess it's $61 billion additional dollars, because the conventional wisdom is this will get to the president's desk post haste and he'll sign it. So what total amount are we talking about? By my math, I think we're talking about somewhere in the neighborhood of $150 billion.
Yeah, actually, on this supplemental bill itself, I call it the supplemental bill because that's what the Senate had. It was $95 billion. Our side, or Johnson, decides to break it in three pieces so people who who are against Ukraine could vote against Ukraine. If you're for or against Israel, you could vote for that. Same with Taiwan. So there was basically 3 bills separated that ironically and adds up to about $95 billion. So,
well, no. What I mean, I don't mean to interrupt you, Scott, but what I mean is I'm trying to figure out how much money the United States of America has sent to Ukraine so far.
Yeah. Okay. I'm tracking with you now. Probably closer to with this, probably closer to 170 billion.
Wow.
And of that, only about 50 would be military or lethal aid, which is kind of what we committed to. So, I mean, not that that's a small number, it's a huge number. But if you think our annual defense spending is around 800, maybe 850 billion now because it keeps going up, that's over 10% of our annual defense spending that's gone to Ukraine. And it's, again, not all for lethal aid. We don't know exactly where it's all going, and I think that's what people have a problem with.
Well, there lies the heart of the concern is that 170 billion, 50 billion of it you can track to like military aid, military weapons, ammunition, these types of things. That leaves 100, and I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt here. That leaves $120 billion of money that are Congressman, we legitimately don't know where it's going or what it's being used for.
I mean, you can probably break it down a little bit, but there's a lot of blank spaces in there, and we've been begging the DOD to be transparent and tell the people where that money is going. Almost every month when I get a briefing, I ask for that. I ask for the Biden administration to go on TV and tell the people why we're spending this money and what the reason are. Because degrading one of our major adversaries can have some advantages, but we don't know exactly what's happening. It looks like a World War I trench warfare that's going on right now. And from what I gather, nothing's going to change for at least another year. And so we're looking at another $60 billion now. What happens in 8 months? Are they coming back, with their hands out for the same amount? And there's no strategy that I can tell to come to the peace table or to win that war. So
what do your colleagues in Washington, D.C., who are more hawkish on this front, you obviously, we're talking with Representative Scott DesJarlais, and he voted against these measures over the weekend. What do they say when you ask for accountability, when you say that we need to demand that the Department of Defense offer us some semblance of a line item on where the money's going, and that we demand that from Ukraine? What's the response when you request that we show the American people what their money's being spent on?
You generally get the "we'll get back to you" response. We'll take that into account and reach back out. So, I mean, that's very frustrating because I've heard it many times.
So we're hearing that some of this money is going into Ukrainian pensions. Are you hearing the same thing?
As well, I've heard that as well, and that's what, certainly. I mean, the number one issue in America right now is our own border security. So people are pissed off about this, and they should be. $95 billion to secure other countries' borders. And what happened with the border bill on this one, they're trying to blame Republicans because it was pulled out of this package because they knew if there was border security in this foreign aid package, the Senate would reject it. So they separated that part, which is basically H.R. 2 minus E-Verify. So still a strong border bill. That was brought down in rules, so it came to the floor under suspension. I voted for that, so did every Republican, and interestingly, 5 Democrats. But it failed because it needed 289, and it only got, 218 or 220. I can't remember how many were there voting. But it was designed to fail. So I think as soon as we get back in a week, we put the exact same bill on the floor under a rule and hold those 5 Democrats who needed cover for their election, because this is not just a Republican problem. It's a nationwide problem that Democrats are feeling the heat too, and it's a message we can win on. So that bill needs to come back to the floor under a rule. Then it only takes a simple majority to pass. It'd be really interesting if those 5 Democrats who voted for it Saturday all of a sudden have a change of heart and vote against it.
All right, so I'm just breaking down some of the monies that we're talking about that total into the $95 billion. You mentioned $61 billion for Ukraine. Talk to me about the debate, if any, regarding Gaza humanitarian aid. And you brought up the concern that most of us recognize as so legitimate, that anything going to Gaza will go through the hands of Hamas, and they will strip, whether it's monies or food, whatever it is, they're going to use for their own purposes what they want to use before anything trickles down to the Palestinian people.
And you know it's going to happen. Yes, they'll show pictures of water and food trucks getting to the right people, but when you're talking $9 billion in aid, there's no way to keep track of that. There's supposed to be safeguards and guardrails, but that's a very condensed area over there, and it's under Hamas control. I kind of get a kick out of these Palestinian protesters, or the anti-Israel protesters that we're seeing pop up all across America, and they were there in force in the Capitol this weekend. There was probably 100 of them in the tunnel as we were going over to vote for all this. And my question to them, if they're pro-Palestinian, why are they not over there fighting, helping Israel get rid of Hamas? So either they're Palestinian and anti-Hamas, or they're Palestinian pro-Hamas. And Hamas is a terrorist group, and it needs to be eradicated, and that's what Israel's doing. It's the right thing to do. So I didn't get a chance to ask these protesters directly, but if we had to fight for our freedom, if Palestine wants to have a free nation and get rid of Hamas's rule, they've got to fight against them, and instead they're all just over here complaining to us.
I don't think you're weak on issues involving foreign policy and supporting American allies. Scott, you and I have known each other long enough. I think that you believe in analyzing any given situation and responding accordingly with strength and supporting those that we believe are our brothers in forwarding the concepts of democracy and the spirit of democracy around the globe. All of that to say, why did this happen with so many Republicans supporting it over the weekend when I talked to so many conservatives? And, I mean, you clearly have so many issues with it. How do your colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle justify their votes?
Well, if you don't have the benefit like I do of being on armed services and having all the briefings, I think that every one of these issues is very important. The Taiwan issue is, the Ukraine issue is, the Israel issue is, certainly Iran. And I think we need to strategically balance, our funding for our own military, their military, our allies, NATO. It's interesting that, the Democrats the other day were bragging in a hearing about how they've got up to 11 of the 33 countries in NATO now paying their dues. Like, that's a good thing. But you remember a few years ago, they were villainizing Trump for destroying NATO because he was asking them to pay their fair share, to pay their 2% of GDP. So, yeah, I mean, I get the global strategy, and we are global leaders in the world, and we need to do the things we need to do, but we've only got so much money. We've got our own military to fund. We've got our own borders to secure. And I think the real rub right now, and I didn't answer your question about my colleagues, but the real rub is everyone sees what's going on in this country. Anywhere from 7, 9, 10 million people have entered this country, up to 2 million gotaways, and every gotaway probably has a nefarious intent. Otherwise, they would have turned themselves in and tried to go through the amnesty process and get the free visas, get the free cell phones, get the free education, the free health care, and all that. So the ones that don't turn themselves in are the real threat, and that's what Americans want to be focused on right now. So all these other things are important, and you say we can walk and chew gum. Yes, we can, and this should have been slowed down. It should have been rammed through, but I think a lot of my colleagues felt the need with Israel because the 200-300 missiles that were sent there were drones that depleted the air defense system, so they felt an urgency to get them taken care of. They know Ukraine is very short on 155s and anti-aircraft, and they fear Russia could push further east. And then, the Taiwan thing, again, it's a pending fight. So all those things have merit, but they needed to be kind of digested, looked at, transparent, say this is what we need, this is where it's going. But, the government's so great about just making a big Christmas tree bill, and that's what this was. And it should have been broken down. But the House actually is putting all these back together, as you probably know. All three of those foreign bills, no matter how you voted on them, yes, no, whatever, they all come back together when they go to the Senate. And we didn't get a final vote on that, which I would have been a no, but maybe others would too. So it goes back to the Senate.
And by the way, can you help me understand how that's possible? That they split things up, it's voted on 3 separate ways, and then it goes over to the Senate. I thought that what was voted on in the House goes to the Senate, but they're putting it back together again? Right.
It was a Pelosi deal. It's called MERV, and I can't remember what the acronym stands for. It's MIRV as in Victor. You can look it up. But it's a procedural vote where you split things up, and then they come back together in the end. So it kind of gives people political cover, which is crap, because in the end, it's pretty much the supplemental that we rejected for the last.
Uh-oh. We'll give it a second. Scott, you there? I think we're on.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I lost you for just a second. All right, so only a couple of minutes left. Let me get to the heart of the political question, and that is, the future of the Speaker. I don't see any good way to do anything right now with regard to the Speaker of the House. Everybody tells me that Mike Johnson's a good man, a good conservative, good Christian guy. I don't know what led him to this decision as the best thing that he could do. It seems like a disaster to me, but that's just me sitting here in Nashville, Tennessee. What's the future of Mike Johnson? Do you think there'll be any changes between now and Election Day?
I think it would be a mistake, and not because I'm a huge Mike Johnson fan. I just don't know where we go on the bench after this. We went pretty deep to get him. We have a one-seat majority now that Mike Gallagher's left this weekend. And so it was hard to function when we had 5 seats. So I don't think a change in Speaker is going to be a very good look for the Republican Party. We basically can use the rest of our time between now and November as we try to win back the White House in messaging, which we can win on in terms of border and others, economy and whatnot. We need to continue our investigations because we're in control of the committees. And, we probably need to keep our heads down. We're not going to pass any great conservative legislation that the Senate's going to take up or the White House is going to sign. And that was probably never the case in this Congress. But, I don't think a change in speakership right now is to anyone's advantage.
Scott, thank you for giving us your analysis. Thank you for everything you do in Washington, D.C., and we'll talk again very soon. I appreciate the conversation.
All right. Thanks, Matt.
All right. Take care. There's Congressman Scott DesJarlais.